Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, we are now on to lesson 10 for the year, which will be talking about Scratch, and we are going to do our first shooter game, and it's going to be a side-scrolling shooter, much in the same vein as things like Gradius 3, and if you want to go look those up, you can. But first, I want to just kind of give you a menu overview, and this is Scratch. If you go to scratch.mit.edu or Google for it, it will be there. I have started a new project. I've called it Vic Viper because that's the name of the character I'll be using from the game Gradius. You have, of course, the home page. You have your language button if you prefer things in a different language. You have your file menu, which will be useful to upload and download the files to your computer. And, of course, saving, just so that it saves. And you have some other things like undelete, turbo mode, stage layout, and tips, which come over here. I usually close the tips because they actually block some features that we'll get into later. Up here you have the full screen mode, you have the name, and you have the start flag and the stop flag. And we're going to try and use the start flag for the most part when starting a game. Up here there's some other tools, and we'll get into those later, but let's not worry about those for now. All of the action happens on the stage or a background, and that's right here, and you can either choose one that they already have or paint a new one and so on. These are all features that have, same thing with sprites, choose one that exists, paint your own, upload your own, or take one from the camera. As far as this area, this is the scripts, and these are the things that make the action happen, and we'll talk about what each of these does in a minute. And of course there's backdrops and sounds that can occur. Over here you have the kind of graphical area for when you want to design something, and this comes into play when we create a sprite. So let's do that. I could always draw one by just kind of grabbing a box or something like that and kind of just painting it in. And let's paint it red or something. And, you know, I could use an eraser to make change the size. So when you're in the drawing, there's all of these tools: the paintbrush, the line, the square, the circle text, paint bucket, eraser, select, and so on. Here's the size adjustment, colors, a dauber which can select a color, and of course zoom in, zoom out. And then there's these two, convert to bitmap and vector, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But I want to start by erasing this so it looks kind of like a spaceship, or as best I can do. Okay, but you may notice it's big, it takes up the whole screen. And here's where the vector and bitmap come in. Right now, I can't just select it and shrink it or grow it. But if I convert it to a vector, you'll notice this drawing toolbar goes away and these modification tools come up. And I can just click on this and I can grow it or shrink it or rotate it as I feel fit. So these are all available to you when you convert to vector mode. And if I wanted to edit again, I could convert it back to a bitmap and so on. So these are the drawing tools to work on it. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get a drawing in there, a sprite, as you will. And I'm going to actually upload one from my desktop called Vic Viper. And this happens just to be from the game, Gradius 3. And I'll upload him, and he looks just like that. It's just a very small little icon. And I want to create some scripts. So you'll see over here we talk about events, controls, movements, and we're going to talk about this concept FIFO. And so the first thing we want to talk about is events. And events basically tell us when things can occur. So when something happens, do something else. If something occurs, then go do it. So for example, when this is clicked, I can play a sound and it will make that sound. I can do other things like motion and things like that, such as the forever. These are controls, and these are what happen when we want the computer to make a choice or to continue to do something. And there's two ways to continue to do something. There's the repeat 10, which will do something like, say, motion, turn 15 degrees, and you should see him kind of rotate, and he'll do it 10 times. Now, the other control we have is the forever, and we'll play with these more and more in class, but essentially forever does it until the end of time, or until you tell it to stop, which we can do with this stop arrow. And you'll notice he keeps rotating about. So that's the difference between forever. The ifs we'll get into much, much later, and for now we'll talk about those. One quick thing I do want to talk about is the kind of how the motion and movement and direction work. Scratch works on a Cartesian plane, and for those that don't know what that is, it is basically, oops, we'll undo that if we can. Can we undo? Yeah. So we'll start from here and go like this, and we should probably use the black because this is familiar to most people. And it works on a Cartesian plane, and this Cartesian plane is identified by a couple of things. The x, which symbolizes going in. Ooh. Let's erase that. The x, which symbolizes, let's do this here, get my pen back. X symbolizes going in this direction, left to right, and we have the y direction, which starts up here and goes down. Actually, these both start here in the center, and the center is what we call the origin, and it is 0, 0. So x goes from, this side is negative 240, and that also means that this is positive 240. And so if I were to say that something is 120 on x, and this of course is 0 and 0. So if I were to say something's at 120, it would be somewhere right there. If I said it was negative 120, it'd be somewhere right there on the x. Our y value goes from 180 to negative 180. Oops, negative 180. And so this, of course, is also 0, and this, of course, is also 0. So our origin, which will be, for this purpose of this, right there, is our origin, is always 0, 0. That's why we use a big 0 for it. So if I said something was on the y plane, and it was, for example, positive 90, it would be right about there, because 180, 0, somewhere in the middle would be 90. Likewise, this would be negative 90. And this becomes very important when we're trying to figure out where we are. If someone were to give you, and I'm going to clear this, the coordinates negative 200, comma, negative 70. Well, we know that the dead center, if we remember, is the origin. Negative 200 would be negative 200 over. Again, 240 was our maximum. So it'd be somewhere here, and negative 70 is pretty close to negative 90, so our object would be somewhere here. And we can actually get a good view of that if we go to our vector here, and we say to our motion, go to negative 200 and negative 70. And we'll actually see how close I got on my drawing there. And if I click on it, you'll notice he goes right a little bit farther than where I mentioned, but he goes negative 200 and then negative 70 down. Likewise, if I go to, and I'm going to clear this backdrop, if I go to, for instance, positive 200, which is, and positive 70, he moves this way and then there. So he went from the start, 200, and then up 70. And if I change this to 160 or 170, you notice he goes all the way to the top. If I change it to 0, he's right in the middle. And if I change this to 0, you'll notice it goes right to the middle of the screen. So for directions, we need to understand we work on an x and a y plane, or a Cartesian plane. And right at the center is 0, comma 0. And then x can go from negative 240 to 240, and y can go from 180 to negative 180. So those are things about direction. The other thing we need to understand about direction is the idea of where things point. And once again, we're going to go in and we're going to draw this because direction in, oops, that's not a straight line. Let's undo that. Let's get a straight line in there. So direction works really uniquely in the sense that there is a 0, but the 0 is somewhere else. And so we'll use the 0 up here. So this is 0. And direction works like you would expect. It rotates about the 0 in kind of an arcing fashion. So the direction kind of goes like this. And in the middle, at the bottom, I'll start with, at the bottom here is 180. Okay? That means between 0 and 180 is 90. And of course, this would be 45. And this would be 135. Somewhere in, oops, 135. Somewhere in there. And we can see this if we point our guy here to point in direction, notice 90, he's pointing to the right. But if I tell him to point at 0, you notice he points up. And if I tell him to point at 45, he points at the corner, and 135 points down there, and 180 points down there. Now, here's where it gets a bit tricky, in that most people would say, well, of course, then it's 360 like a complete circle, because what we should have is another arc going like this to there, and 180 plus 180 equals 360, and a circle is 360 degrees. Unfortunately, that's not how Scratch works. Scratch works in the reverse, which is, this is also, as it would be, negative 180. And this would be negative 90, and of course 0. And of course negative 45 and negative 135 would be there. So to prove that to you, we'll go to our Vic Viper and we'll put it in. So negative 90 points to there, negative 45 points up, and negative 135 points down, and of course negative 180 also points down. So negative 180 and 180 are the same. I guess 270 might work, but for the most part in Scratch we use this coordinate system, and the reason we do is because it's preset for us right here for some directions, okay? So that is it for today. I wanted to go over the coordinates plane and all of that kind of thing. We'll get towards making it move, making an object move next time. But you need to understand these concepts. If you feel like playing with it, go right ahead, and I will see you next time.